Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Before there were gates, soldiers, and sirens, there were dust roads and shared water drums. Oena, son of Mr. and Mrs. Uma, once lived in a small two-room flat in Enugu where laughter echoed louder than hardship. Right beside them, in a slightly more crumbled building, lived Mom and Didi, her husband, and their 5 children, the youngest of whom was a bold, curious girl named Chidura. Chidura and Oena were born only 1 year apart, and from the moment they could walk, they toddled into each other's lives. They played 10-10 with chalk on the concrete floor, hunted grasshoppers during harmattan, and bathed together in metal basins behind their houses. No one thought twice of it then. Their mothers would take turns feeding them, and their fathers would drink palm wine together under the mango tree, laughing about politics and old age. They didn't know that one day, politics would break that tree in half. Even at that young age, it was clear that Chidurra had a lion spirit. Oena was quieter, gentle. He cried easily and avoided conflict like it was a plague. Chidurra, however, had fire in her. She was the one who shouted when someone tried to take Oena's rubber ball. She once yanked an older boy by the shirt for calling Oena weak after he tripped during a race. She bruised her knees and ripped her dresses protecting him. And when he was too scared to climb trees, she'd climb first and help him up. Though she was younger, she had always led him. Their mothers often laughed, saying, "One day, this Chidurra will be Oena's president." No one laughed louder than Oena, and no one believed it more than him. In their world, titles didn't exist. They were just children bound by shared joy, common dreams, and afternoon naps on raffia mats. They spoke of the future like it was theirs to mold. She wanted to be a lawyer. He wanted to be a writer. They'd build a house where both their parents could live. They'd have a goat named Chairman. Their friendship was the kind that made neighbors say, "These ones are inseparable." And they were. Until one night, a black Prado Jeep came to their compound, and everything began to change. Mr. Uma had joined a rising political party and was being groomed for office. With sponsorship came status. With status came relocation. In the blink of an eye, Oena was whisked away to the city, to a new house with polished tiles and gates taller than trees. No more compound games. No more dust. No more shared plates of rice. Chidurra stood by their old gate that evening, her bare feet covered in red sand, and watched her best friend wave from the tinted car window, holding back tears. He pressed his palm to the glass. She nodded. Neither of them said goodbye. School without Oena was different for Chidurra. The sun seemed hotter. The classroom seemed colder. There was no one to draw cartoons with on the back of her notebooks or to share her gari and groundnuts with during lunch breaks. Yet, she didn't sulk or cry. She threw herself into schoolwork with the same fire she used to defend Oena from bullies. Whenever his name came up, usually followed by the word rich, she would defend him. "He's not like the others," she'd say. "He's kind." And he was. But the separation began to stretch, and the longer they stayed apart, the more his absence turned into silence. Still, she waited, sitting sometimes under the same mango tree they once played under, whispering to the wind, as if it might carry her voice to wherever he was. Back in the city, Oena was struggling too. He couldn't adjust to the new world his parents had pulled him into. He hated the new school uniforms, the smell of air conditioning, and the way the other kids boasted about their vacations in Paris or their father's cars. He missed the sound of barefoot running, the way Chidurra would knock on his window at night with a story to share, and how she would always find a way to make him laugh when he was sad. In this new world, everything was expensive, but nothing was familiar. His parents barely had time to notice. They were rising fast in political ranks, attending meetings, hosting dignitaries, and planning campaigns. Oena felt like a pawn, smiling on cue, shaking hands he didn't want to, and always being told to act like the son of the next governor. He didn't want to be any of that. He just wanted Chidurra. One holiday, 2 years after they moved, Oena begged his mother to visit the old neighborhood. She refused. "We've moved forward," she said. "Stop looking back." That night, He sat in his room and cried. Then he opened his old school bag and pulled out the drawing Chidura made of the two of them, stick figures with lopsided smiles, holding hands under a mango tree. She had written on the back, Oena and Chidurra, forever team. From that day, he wore the drawing folded in his wallet. At school, when he was mocked for not having a girlfriend, he would smile and say, "The girl I love is braver than all of you." They didn't understand what he meant, but he knew. She had once jumped in front of a teacher to take the blame for his torn assignment. She had slapped a classmate who spit on his food. She had once lied to save him from punishment. And he never forgot. Even as the world tried to make him forget, he remembered her face, her eyes, her voice. And every day, he prayed that he'd see her again. Time has a way of dulling things, smells, sounds, even faces. But Chidurra never forgot the sound of Oena's laughter, or the way his fingers trembled when he was nervous. By the time she turned 16, her father had fallen sick, and her mother had taken to washing clothes for people to feed the family. The house that once held laughter and songs became filled with prayers and hospital receipts. Chidurra, now a young woman, stopped dreaming of law school and started looking for work. It was during one of those hard evenings that Oena's mother reappeared at their door. The Umas had become a political powerhouse, and Lady Evelyn, though more refined now, still remembered the loyalty of Mom and Didi's family. She offered Chidurra a job in their household, not just as a maid, but as a personal assistant to her son whenever he returned home from university. With quiet dignity, Chidurra accepted the job. Some might have seen it as a fall, but she saw it as fate, a doorway back to where her heart had always been. When she entered the mansion, everything overwhelmed her. The chandelier that looked like falling stars, the marble floors that clicked under her worn shoes, the uniforms, the orders. But nothing shook her more than seeing the picture of Oena on the wall, taller, broader, smiling in a foreign land. He wasn't the small boy who chased dragonflies anymore. He had grown. But in her heart, he was still the same Oena who once gave her his last meat pie. She cleaned his room, folded his shirts, and even found his old storybooks tucked between novels. At night, she would sit by the servant quarters and stare at the moon, whispering, "You'll come back. I know you will." She served diligently. Her hands bled from scrubbing, but her heart never once complained. When the other maids mocked her closeness to the governor's son, she smiled. "He's not my master," she'd say to herself. "He's my friend." Every evening, after school, she returned to serve dinner, polish shoes, or help his mother with errands. But the bond between her and Oena, though paused by years, was beginning to stir again like a fire under ash. One day, she dusted the old chessboard and placed it on his table, the way they used to play. She even placed two pawns side by side. That night, she dreamt of the mango tree, and she wasn't alone under it anymore. She was waiting, and he was walking toward her. There is something soul-breaking about watching someone you once ran barefoot with now bow to you in a uniform. When Oena returned home during his semester break, the mansion was quiet. His father was at a political rally, his mother was at a women's association meeting, and the household was run like a strict machine. The servants kept their eyes low and their voices lower. But as Oena stepped through the corridor of his wing, something stopped him. A soft hum coming from the laundry room. He turned the corner and froze. There she was, Chidurra, bent over a bucket, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied in a scarf, still humming the song they used to sing when they fetched water as kids. His voice caught in his throat. She hadn't noticed him yet. He stepped closer, and as if something stirred her spirit, she turned around slowly. Their eyes met. The world spun. For a full minute, they didn't speak. Just stared, wide-eyed, breath held, like time had reversed itself. Then Chidurra quickly dropped her gaze and knelt, murmuring, "Welcome, sir," the words heavy and wrong in her mouth. Oena stepped forward and pulled her up gently. "Don't do that," he said, his voice almost a whisper. She smiled nervously, but it was the same smile, shy but full of fire. That night, they talked behind the staircase, just like old times. She had grown more graceful, her eyes wiser, her hands calloused, but steady. She told him about her father's illness, about missing school sometimes to work, about how she never stopped waiting for his return. He listened, fists clenched, guilt stabbing him with every word. She told him she was grateful for the job. He told her he hated seeing her in uniform. She laughed, and it echoed, the same way it did under the mango tree. But nothing felt the same anymore. Not completely. From that day forward, their friendship rekindled like dry wood catching fire. Oena would come to the dining room early just to see her serve breakfast. He would wait outside the kitchen for leftover tea and secretly pass her notes scribbled with chess moves. At night, they'd meet quietly under the stairs or in the garden behind the mansion, where the cameras didn't reach. She'd tell him about her dreams, still wanting to be a lawyer, and he'd promise her he'd make it happen. They laughed. They talked. They healed. But what they didn't know was that their closeness was beginning to draw attention. One of the guards had already reported to the chief of staff that the governor's son was too familiar with the Maid girl. But for Oena, nothing else mattered. For the first time in years, he felt like himself again. Not the politician's heir. Not the foreign scholar. Just Oena, the boy who loved the girl next door. The day Oena was scheduled to leave for his final year abroad was quiet. Too quiet. Chidurra had tried her best not to cry, not to cling, not to make him feel guilty. She had learned to live with loss. But this one felt different. She had gotten used to his presence again. The way he always left one egg for her on his plate. The way he helped her sneak extra meat from the pot when Madam wasn't looking. The way he looked at her now, like she was more than just his past. On the morning of his departure, she woke earlier than usual and ironed his favorite shirt, the one he wore when he passed his WEC. She folded it neatly and placed it on his bed, with a small note tucked under the collar. Forever team. When Oena saw it, his heart broke in places he didn't know still existed. They met again in the garden, where they used to play police and thief as children. The same garden where he had given her his last sweet as a boy, where she once hid from her mother after breaking a neighbor's window. Now they stood as adults, inches apart, unsure of what to say. He reached into his pocket and brought out a simple necklace, a tiny gold plate engraved with their names. "You'll wait for me?" he asked. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Then, for the first time, she reached up and kissed his cheek. "I'll wait," she whispered. And she meant it. As the car drove him away, Chidurra stood under the mango tree and watched until she couldn't see him anymore. Then she turned around, wiped her eyes, and went back inside to sweep the floor. Her world didn't stop because he left, but it certainly became quieter. Oena sat on the plane with the necklace clutched in his hand, heart heavy, soul torn. He had traveled before, but this time he wasn't just leaving Nigeria. He was leaving a piece of himself behind. Abroad, he buried himself in books, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Chidurra's hands, strong from work, soft from kindness. He saw the way she had bowed before him the first time they reunited, and how wrong it had felt. He hated that she still wore that uniform. He hated that the world had put them on different sides of a wall they didn't build. But most of all, he hated the silence, the kind that seeped into phone lines, that made letters feel distant. Yet every time he thought of giving up, he remembered her whisper, "I'll wait." And so he worked hard, saved money, and planned. Because when he returned, he wouldn't just come back. He'd come back for her. While Oena studied abroad, a storm was brewing in Nigeria, one he had no idea was forming around his name. Governor Uma, now firmly seated in power, was under pressure from his political godfather, Chief Maduka. The deal had been simple: financial backing and protection in exchange for a marital alliance that would merge their empires. That alliance was meant to be sealed through the union of Oena and Maduka's daughter, Amara, a beautiful but scandal-prone young woman known more for her designer clothes and nightclub appearances than her character. Governor Uma, desperate to hold his position in the volatile world of politics, had agreed without hesitation. "My son will marry her," he said confidently. "He's loyal." But what he failed to realize was that loyalty, once betrayed, is never blind. Amara visited the mansion during Obena's absence, and her presence was like perfume and poison in the same bottle. She insulted the cooks, rolled her eyes at the maids, and once slapped the gardener for watering her shoes by mistake. Chidurra, who had grown more silent over the months, became her frequent target. Amara mocked her accent, called her bush girl, and once poured wine on the dress Chidurra had sewn with her own hands. The mansion staff began to fear her. Lady Evelyn kept her distance. But Governor Oena tolerated it all for the sake of power. To him, this was the price of legacy. To Chidurra, it was humiliation. And to Oena, who remained unaware, it was a ticking time bomb. When Oena returned after graduation, the mansion had changed. More guards, more portraits, more rules. But the biggest change was Amara, dressed in silk, lips always painted, lounging on the family couch like she owned it. She greeted him like a stranger, blowing kisses and calling him darling, as if they had grown up together. He was confused. And then his father sat him down, handed him a drink, and said, "You're a man now. It's time to become a real one. You'll marry Amara. It's settled." Oena nearly choked. "What?" he whispered. "I haven't even agreed to this." But the governor cut him off. "You don't need to agree. It's already done. We've sacrificed too much for this name, Oena. Don't ruin it now." That night, Oena stood at his window, staring at the necklace Chidurra had given him. He hadn't seen her yet since he returned. But he knew if he had to choose between his father's throne and the girl who waited under the mango tree, he already knew what his answer would be. The first time Oena saw Chidurra after returning, he was stepping out of the family car, tired from meetings and exhausted by his father's expectations. The air smelled different, like filtered power and tension. But all of that disappeared the moment he caught sight of her through the curtains near the kitchen. She wasn't wearing the schoolgirl uniform she once had, but a neat maid's gown with her hair braided into a bun. Yet nothing about her looked like a servant. There was grace in the way she carried a tray of tea, strength in the quiet confidence of her steps. He froze in place. She turned, and their eyes met. Not even time could erase the softness in her stare. He walked toward her, but before he could say a word, she dropped her gaze and curtsied slightly. "Welcome home, sir," she said, the word "sir" like a dagger in his chest. Oena couldn't stand it. That night, while everyone slept, he knocked softly on the door of the servant quarters. Chidurra opened it, surprised but not startled, as if she'd been expecting him all along. They sat by the staircase like they used to, knees touching, silence stretching between them like a fragile thread. "You grew taller," she teased softly. "You didn't grow at all," he replied with a smile. But then he frowned. "Why are you still here, Chidurra? Still serving?" She shrugged. "Because I promised I'd wait for you. And because this is where the job is. I help my family with what I earn." Oena looked away, ashamed. He'd been living in comfort while she was enduring humiliation, and now, to make things worse, she had to watch a stranger like Amara act like she belonged. But as days passed, they found each other again in stolen moments, brief encounters in the hallway, shared looks during dinner service, and whispered jokes behind closed doors. It was like breathing after drowning. Chidurra never asked about Amara, and Oena never offered details. But the truth burned between them. Amara was chaos wrapped in gold. She flirted with guards, insulted the cook, and once demanded that Oena fire Chidurra because she didn't look submissive enough. He refused. "She's been here long before you," he said coldly. That night, he found Chidurra crying behind the garden wall, not because of Amara's insult, but because she felt like she was becoming a reason for conflict. "You're not the problem," Oena said, holding her hand. "You're the only part of this house that still feels like home." It happened on a Sunday evening. The mansion had hosted a small gathering for the governor's political allies. Amara, ever dramatic, had gotten drunk and publicly mocked Chidurra by calling her governor's pet maid, and purposely spilling red wine on her only decent outfit. Everyone had laughed, except Oena. His fists clenched, and his face turned red, but his father gave him a sharp look, silently warning him not to cause a scene. Chidurra had stood frozen for a moment, her eyes glistening, before fleeing into the garden. Hours later, when the guests had gone and Amara passed out on the couch, Oena found her sitting alone beneath the mango tree, the same one that watched over them as children. She had her knees drawn to her chest, face buried, her uniform stained with wine and shame. He sat beside her in silence. For minutes, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been if your father hadn't gone into politics?" Oena nodded slowly. "Every single day." She turned to him, tears running silently down her cheeks. "I feel like I'm being punished for loving you." His heart broke. He reached out and wiped her tears with his thumb. "Then we're both being punished." The moonlight cast shadows around them, but the light between them was undeniable. He leaned forward, and before his mind could stop him, his lips touched hers. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't forced. It was slow, aching, and filled with the weight of every memory they had buried. The mango tree swayed gently above them, as if blessing a reunion the world had tried to tear apart. But then a sharp sound broke the moment, a camera flash from the second-story balcony. Oena sprang to his feet, looking up just in time to see a figure disappearing behind the curtains. Chidurra stood, panicked, her hand to her mouth. "We've made a mistake," she said breathlessly. "No," Oena replied, taking her hand. "We finally did something right." But they both knew what had just happened. In that one kiss, they had shattered a fragile illusion, that things could continue quietly, that their love could remain in secret. Someone had seen, and in a mansion filled with ambition, secrets, and cameras, even one moment of truth could start a war. The next morning, Oena was summoned to the study, a cold, heavy room with dark wood and thicker silence. His father was seated behind the desk, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The door clicked shut behind Oena. "Sit down," the governor said. Oena remained standing. "So," his father continued, turning the tablet around to show him a photo, grainy but unmistakable. It was the kiss. Oena said nothing. "You really had the audacity to kiss a maid in this house? After everything I built?" Oena replied softly, "She's not just a maid. She's Chidurra." That name made his father's jaw tighten. "I know who she is. That's the problem. She doesn't belong in our world. And you don't get to throw away what we've built for a girl you used to play in the mud with." Governor Uma stood, his voice rising. "Do you understand the deal we're in? Do you know what Chief Maduka will do to me if this marriage doesn't happen? I'll be out. You'll be out. Our family will be ruined. You think love is enough to protect you from political disgrace? I made promises, boy." Obena's chest rose and fell with anger, but his voice was calm. "Then you made them without me." The governor stared at him, almost like seeing him for the first time. Then came the threat, cold, calculated, cruel. "If you don't end this thing with that girl, I will destroy her family. I will take everything from them. And I'll do it quietly. No one will know it was me." Oena stared at his father. "Then destroy me too," he said, "because I will never choose power over Chidurra." The silence afterward was like a funeral. When Oena left the study, his hands were shaking, but his heart felt steady. He knew he had just drawn a line his father would not cross without blood. In the servant quarters, Chidurra sat on her bed, clutching the necklace he once gave her, unaware of the war now circling her. Across the house, Amara was awake, already threatening the staff and demanding to know when wedding preparations would begin. And in the background, like a shadow lurking in daylight, Chief Maduka was preparing his next move, because in his world, deals weren't broken without consequences. Oena had made his choice, and now the cost would come. The morning after Oena refused his father's ultimatum, news traveled faster than lightning. Whispers danced through the political corridors of Enugu like wildfire, rumors that the governor's son was involved with a common maid. What made it worse was that someone had leaked the photo. The image wasn't clear, but the story was too juicy for the press to resist. The governor's enemies seized the moment. In private WhatsApp groups and closed-door meetings, Chief Maduka's allies prepared for war. The deal had been simple. Oena would marry Amara, thus merging two political giants. Now everything was on the verge of collapse because of a kiss beneath a mango tree. Maduka was furious. That evening, he arrived at the mansion unannounced with his entourage, demanding answers. Oena sat silently at the dining table while the two powerful men argued in the next room. His father, pacing like a lion. Maduka, roaring like thunder. Amara stood in the hallway, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even heartbroken. What she was, however, was insulted. In her world, no man said no to her, especially not in favor of a maid. She had her own ambitions, too. Her father's connections were the keys to a future Senate run, and being married to a governor's son was supposed to be her elevator ride to fame. But now, she was being humiliated in whispers and laughter. So, she decided to turn her bitterness into revenge. That night, she marched into Obena's room and confronted him. "You think you're better than me? You think that girl will survive what's coming?" "Oena, remain calm. This has nothing to do with you, Amara. It's between me, my father, and Chidurra." But Amara wasn't interested in peace. She wanted spectacle. And in her eyes, the only way to make things right was to destroy the girl who made her look like a fool. In a final attempt to salvage the crumbling agreement, Governor Uma called his son once again. This time, he was calmer, too calm. "You think you're in love now, but love doesn't pay debts, Oena," he said. "If this alliance breaks, everything I've worked for will fall apart. I built this empire for you." Oena shook his head slowly. "You build it on chains and lies. I never asked for it." The governor clenched his jaw and sighed. "Then you leave me no choice." That night, Chidurra was relocated from the mansion's main quarters to a servant's outhouse in the compound, and her father, who worked in a state-funded agricultural department, was abruptly suspended from duty without explanation. It was the beginning, quiet, cruel, and systematic, and Oena could see it clearly now. His father wouldn't back down. If love was his rebellion, then war had officially begun. Lady Evelynuma had always been soft-spoken, the elegant figure behind the governor's throne. She was never loud, never confrontational, the kind of woman whose presence carried more authority in silence than in speech. But what most didn't know was that Evelyn had been watching everything, quietly keeping score of the house's unfolding tragedy. She saw the pain in Obena's eyes each time Chidurra passed without looking at him. She saw how her husband's ambition had twisted the family into puppets, herself included. She saw how Amara treated everyone like tools. But most of all, she remembered who Chidurra used to be, the tiny girl who once offered her an orange from the same tree that Oena had fallen out of while playing. She remembered her kindness, her fire, her dignity. It pained her that politics had reduced that girl to a servant in her home. Evelyn didn't confront her husband directly. She knew the beast he had become. Instead, she began to fight quietly. She slipped a sealed envelope filled with cash beneath Chidurra's bed, enough to buy herself dignity if she ever needed to run. She handed Oena a folded paper tucked inside a handkerchief, a map of all the surveillance blind spots around the mansion. She even bribed Matilda, the senior maid, to stop reporting Chidurra's movements. "There are some things worth protecting," Evelyn whispered to her one night, "and some children who still deserve peace." Her way of fighting wasn't through speeches or defiance. It was through quiet resistance. But even she knew time was running out. The walls were tightening. The governor had started taking calls behind locked doors, and Chief Maduka's car now showed up every evening with security men in tow. One evening, Evelyn found Chidurra alone in the kitchen, staring blankly at a pot of burning rice. She walked in gently and touched her shoulder. "You need to go before it's too late," she said. Chidurra looked up, startled. "Ma, I don't understand." Evelyn sat down and took her hand. "I saw the way you used to laugh when you were little. That joy is gone, and I fear what will be left if you stay here any longer." Tears rolled down Chidurra's cheeks. "But I promised I'd wait for him." Evelyn nodded. "Then wait. But not in this house. My son loves you, but your presence here is killing you both." That night, Evelyn packed a small bag with food, painkillers, and money. She slipped it under Chidurra's bed along with a note. "When the fire starts, don't wait for it to burn you. Run." When men become desperate, their morality fades. And Governor Uma, cornered and humiliated, was now a man stripped of reason. The threats had become louder. Chief Maduka had openly warned him that the marriage must proceed, or else he'd lose the support of powerful party elders who had protected him from scandals in the past. With each day, the press grew more curious. Anonymous messages and photos were being leaked. Enemies were circling. Impeachment whispers had begun. So he made a decision. If removing Chidurra peacefully had failed, he would now do it quietly, permanently. He didn't issue the order directly, of course. That would be sloppy. Instead, he told one of his old political loyalists, a man named Iken, to handle the nuisance in the most silent way possible. Iken understood perfectly. That night, while rain poured violently and thunder echoed across the mansion walls, a masked man crept into the servant quarters. He had the master key. He knew exactly which room. What he didn't know was that Oena had started sleeping near Chidurra's door ever since he suspected something was wrong. When the door creaked open, Oena was already awake. Chidurra stirred slightly, but Oena moved like a shadow and grabbed the nearest stool. When the man stepped into the room, Oena struck him hard on the head. A struggle followed, loud, messy, chaotic. Chidurra screamed as the man slashed Oena's arm with a blade. Blood splattered across the wall. Guards came running. The masked man escaped through the back fence, disappearing into the storm. The mansion was in uproar. The governor pretended to be shocked. Burglar, he claimed. Random robbery. But Oena knew better. He looked his father dead in the eyes and saw it, the cold emptiness of a man who could hurt his own son to protect his name. With a bloodied arm and a burning heart, Oena walked into Chidurra's room the next morning. She was still shaking. He took her hands and said, "We're leaving. Tonight. If we stay, they'll bury us." Chidurra tried to argue, but he silenced her. "No more waiting. No more silence. You've done enough suffering for me." That evening, Lady Evelyn handed Oena a small key to a side gate that led directly to the back road. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "Don't look back." Oena nodded. "Thank you, Mum." And as the sun began to set, casting blood-red shadows on the mansion walls, two hearts prepared to run, not just for love, but for life. They had crossed the line, and there was no going back. The silence before dawn felt like a hell breath, tense, thick, waiting to be shattered. Oena stood in the corridor of the staff quarters, watching the light flicker over Chidurra's face as she packed only what was necessary, a wrapper, a worn Bible, and the necklace he gave her long ago. She had no jewelry, no savings, no perfume, only the weight of memories and the promise of freedom. Oena, bleeding slightly from the stitches in his arm, kept his eyes on the door. He had memorized the route from Lady Evelyn's instructions, the servant gate behind the fence, the narrow bush path to the junction, and the rendezvous point where Connell, the family's driver, would wait with an old taxi borrowed from his cousin. At exactly 5:14 a.m., they slipped through the back door like whispers. As they crept past the mango tree, Chidurra turned back one last time. Her eyes welled up with tears as she looked at the mansion, not because it had ever been home, but because every scar she bore had been earned inside those walls. Oena noticed her hesitation and squeezed her hand. "We're not running away," he whispered. "We're running towards something better." She nodded slowly. Outside the gate, Connell was waiting, engine humming low, eyes darting anxiously. "Oga, if dem catch us, I know dey, oh," he muttered, but opened the back door all the same. Oena gave him a nod and passed him a brown envelope, all the cash she had left. "You've done enough," he said. "Don't look back." Connell crossed himself and drove off in silence, heading toward Nsukka, the one place still untouched by his father's political reach. By sunrise, they had vanished. News hadn't broken yet, but the absence was already felt. Guards knocked on Oena's room and found the bed unslept. Chidurra's bunk was empty. The governor was still asleep when the house erupted in panic. Lady Evelyn stood in the hallway with a blank face, hiding the storm inside her. Amara screamed for answers, smashing a wine glass against the wall. Chief Maduka was on the phone within minutes, demanding an emergency meeting. And while the mansion spun into chaos, Oena and Chidurra sat in a dusty taxi, bumping through red earth roads, holding hands in silence. They had no phones, no documents, and no plan beyond survival. But in that silence, they felt something they hadn't felt in months: peace. For the first time, they had no one to impress, no mask to wear. Just two hearts, scarred but still beating, choosing each other over everything. It didn't take long for the lie to arrive. That same evening, Governor Uma appeared at a hastily arranged press briefing. Cameras flashed. Reporters asked frantic questions. His tie was crooked, his eyes bloodshot. But his voice was calm, too calm. "My son has been kidnapped," he said. "We believe it was orchestrated by a disgruntled former staff, who manipulated him and lured him away from his home. The suspect, a young maid named Chidurra, is believed to be armed and dangerous. We ask the public to help us bring them home safely." The lies rolled off his tongue like oil, clean, practiced, poisonous. And within hours, the media began to spread it. Posters bearing Chidurra's photo, the only one from her staff ID, were plastered across the city. Wanted for abduction and ransom plot. Her eyes, tired and humble in the image, were now painted as criminal. Oena watched it all unfold from the cracked screen of a local beer parlor TV in Succa. His fist slammed the table, but Chidurra remained calm. "They'll believe him," she said softly. "He has the money. He has the power." Oena looked at her, torn between rage and helplessness. "Not everyone will." But even as he spoke, he could feel the walls closing in. A nearby table of men were already whispering. One of them pulled out his phone and took a photo, pretending to stretch. They had to move. Again. That night, they left the town and headed deeper into the countryside, settling in a small settlement where electricity was a suggestion and suspicion was normal. An old woman named Mama Ifioma took them in, asking no questions. She gave them a room, a mattress, and a bowl of okra soup. "As long as you fetch water in the morning, you're welcome," she said with a toothless smile. Meanwhile, back in the city, Chidurra's family was being torn apart. Her father, already suspended from his job, was arrested and detained for fraudulent payroll activities, a charge he couldn't even spell. Her mother collapsed from stress and was hospitalized. Neighbors distanced themselves out of fear. The Uma name carried enough weight to destroy a person without leaving fingerprints. Obena's father was on every radio station, crying fake tears and appealing for his beloved son to come home. Amara staged her own press appearance, pretending to be the devastated fiancé. "I just want him to be safe," she said between crocodile tears. The world saw scandal. The press saw story. But in truth it was a war, and love was their only weapon. Governor Uma thought he could ride the storm, as he had done many times before. But this time, the cracks were too loud to ignore. Chief Maduka's patience had run dry. "Your son has embarrassed my daughter and disgraced this party," he thundered during a private meeting at the government lodge. "I gave you power, and this is how you repay me." Uma pleaded for time, assuring him that Oena would be found and brought back. But Maduka wasn't interested in stories. He wanted control. "The marriage is off," he declared, "and so is my protection." Within 48 hours, Maduka had rallied his loyalists in the House of Assembly and began discussing impeachment proceedings. The very throne Uma had sacrificed his son for was beginning to crumble beneath him. Political allies began to distance themselves. Newspaper headlines shifted from concern to scandal. Where's the governor's son? Maid or mistress? A family torn by power. Lady Evelyn withdrew completely from public view, refusing to defend her husband. Amara grew more reckless, leaking private voice notes of the governor's plans in an attempt to salvage her reputation. One of them included a conversation where Uma said, "We'll deal with her quietly, just like the others." It wasn't clear who her referred to, but the damage was done. Whispers of previous cover-ups, bribes, and threats surfaced. Enemies who once bowed before him now stood tall, sensing blood in the water. The opposition, once dormant, called for accountability. The governor, once untouchable, now stood on shaking legs. Back in their hideout, Oena sat on the porch sharpening a hoe, helping Mama Ifioma's grandson prepare for early farming. Chidurra returned from the market, dust covering her feet, a basket of plantains on her head. They lived like strangers in their own country, hunted, forgotten, and yet free in a way they'd never been before. "They'll never forgive us," Oena said one night as they lay on the cold floor. Chidurra turned to him, brushing hair from his face. "We didn't do it for them." He looked at her, broken and whole all at once. "Would you still have waited for me if I never came back?" She smiled. "I would have waited even if you never did." Outside, the sky was quiet, but in the governor's mansion, chaos reigned. And in a world where power once ruled everything, two runaways were starting to understand something even stronger: the cost of peace. The truth has a strange way of surviving even in silence. While the governor clung desperately to his collapsing image, and the world debated the story fed to them, a young journalist named Iken sat in his cluttered newsroom, going through an envelope that would change everything. It was slipped anonymously under the door of the local paper in Succa. Yellowed letters from Chidura's school principal, notes from her pastor, and a handwritten testimonial from her former literature teacher. Each letter told a different version of the same truth. Chidurra was no criminal. She was brilliant, disciplined, selfless. There were details about how she tutored classmates for free despite working nights as a housemaid, how she once donated her entire allowance to a sick student's surgery fund. It was impossible to reconcile the girl in those letters with the fugitive the government was painting. Dyke, usually detached and calculating, found himself unable to ignore it. He reached out to a few of the signatories. Carefully, quietly, they confirmed every word. One even confessed that she'd been warned not to speak up unless you want your school shut down. That was the final trigger. Dyke worked all night, combing through Chidura's history, linking her name with Oena's through school records and a few dusty neighborhood archives. And then he published it. The headline was blunt. She was never the maid. She was the girl who loved him first. The article exploded like a grenade. It went viral on social media in hours. Pictures of Oena and Chidurra from primary school emerged. Two dusty children holding hands, muddy feet, shared joy. Videos surfaced of Chidurra giving speeches at her secondary school's prize-giving day. Suddenly, she wasn't a nameless maid anymore. She was a symbol of loyalty, of betrayal, of quiet endurance crushed by powerful eyes. The backlash was immediate. Students protested online, demanding justice for Chidurra. Women's groups, ones not sponsored by the state, began calling out the governor for using his office to destroy an innocent girl. Opposition leaders seized the opportunity to question the moral foundation of the ruling party. And for the first time, the governor couldn't spin the narrative. His silence now looked like guilt. Chief Maduka, enraged that his daughter was caught in the center of such shame, washed his hands off the affair completely and hinted at past political crimes. "It's time we stop acting like kings," he told a press crew, not naming names but aiming daggers. In exile, hiding under the roof of an old woman with a broken roof, Chidurra sat beside a transistor radio and wept quietly as she listened. "The world is finally seeing me," she said. Oena held her hand. "They should have seen you a long time ago." Life in the countryside wasn't gentle, but it was honest. Oena and Chidurra woke before dawn each day, fetching water in plastic buckets and tending to Mama Iphioma's little garden. They had become part of the community, not as guests, but as simple people surviving quietly. Oena used his time to help the children in the village read and write, creating makeshift lesson boards from plywood and charcoal. Chidurra taught young girls how to sew, using the one working machine in the town. At night, they lay on a woven mat beneath the stars, often in silence, sometimes sharing dreams that felt too fragile to speak aloud. Despite the hardships, the leaking roof, the days they skipped meals, they found a strange kind of peace. A love untainted by wealth or cameras. A love that survived on patience. But peace doesn't always mean safety. Their faces were still being circulated. Their names were still hot currency among bounty hunters and desperate men looking for favors from the governor. Every time a stranger entered the village, Oena tensed. He no longer slept soundly, often waking to inspect the door or check the back window. Chidurra, on the other hand, found strength in movement. She refused to live in fear. "We've suffered too much to still be prisoners," she said. Yet she worried, not for herself, but for Oena. He had lost everything. His title, his comfort, his family's protection. And though he never said it, she knew the guilt haunted him. Sometimes she caught him staring at the necklace in her hand and blinking back tears. "We're safe, Oena," she whispered once. He nodded, but the shadows under his eyes said otherwise. Then one evening, as they returned from the farm path, a group of young men approached. Strangers. Smooth talkers. They claimed to be looking for land to purchase, a familiar excuse. Oena's instinct screamed. That night, he told Mama Ifioma they had to move again. "You've helped us too much already," he said. But Mama Ifioma shook her head. "If God brings you to my door, I won't close it because men are hunting. I'll just make more room inside." Her kindness was a balm to their scars. But the truth lingered like smoke. They were not safe. The world was catching up. And this time, it wasn't just their hearts that were in danger. It was their lives. It happened on a Thursday morning. Chidurra had gone to the local market for palm oil, while Oena stayed back to repair the leaking roof. He was halfway through hammering a broken sheet when he heard the scream. It wasn't a market noise, it was her voice. Panicked. He didn't think. He dropped the hammer, grabbed the rusted machete beside the door, and ran barefoot. What he saw froze his soul. 2 men had cornered Chidurra near the banana stall. One held her arm tightly. Another gripped her wrapper. They were dragging her toward a waiting bike, ignoring the crowd that watched in silence, too afraid to intervene. "Let her go," Oena roared, charging like a bull. The men turned, surprised, but not threatened. One drew a knife. But Oena didn't stop. He slammed into the man holding Chidurra and punched him squarely in the jaw. The blade came next, slicing across Oena's shoulder. Blood poured. Chidurra screamed. He stumbled, but didn't fall. The pain was sharp, but his grip on her was stronger. The second man tried to tackle him, but this time the villagers moved. Mama Ifioma's grandson threw a stone. A fish seller screamed for help. The crowd grew bolder, and the attackers fled, leaving behind a trail of dust and blood. Oena collapsed beside Chidurra, eyes fluttering. "You're bleeding," she cried, pressing her wrapper against his wound. He smiled faintly. "You're okay, that's what matters." She wept, rocking him gently as others surrounded them. A local nurse arrived minutes later and stitched him up on the floor of the small clinic. The wound was deep, but not fatal. Still, something deeper had been cut, the illusion of peace. The village was no longer safe. They would have to move. Again. That night, Chidurra sat beside Oena, her fingers trembling as she changed his bandage. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. "You could have died." He looked at her, eyes heavy but clear. "Because I'd rather bleed for you than live without you." She broke. The tears came like a flood. She laid her head on his chest, sobbing quietly. "I hate that we keep running," she whispered. "I hate that loving you means hiding." Oena stroked her hair gently. "Then let's stop running," he said. "Not by going back, but by moving forward. Somewhere new. Somewhere no one knows our names." Chidurra nodded slowly. "As long as we're together." Outside, the moon rose quietly, not as a witness to a tragedy, but as a witness to a vow. In a world full of noise, their love spoke without a single word. Governor Uma stood before the high council of party elders like a man stripped of his armor. The once proud and defiant politician now had sunken eyes, a cracking voice, and sweat staining the armpits of his tailored agbada. Around him sat power brokers who once praised him, now staring at him with cold, calculating detachment. Chief Maduka, whose silence was louder than thunder, refused to even look him in the eye. "You promised us control," one elder said. "Instead, your son has humiliated our legacy." The governor tried to explain. "He's young. He was manipulated." The girl, but another elder cut him off. "It is not the girl. It is your failure as a father. You couldn't keep your own house in order. How then will you lead ours?" The words landed like punches. each one knocking another brick off the walls of a crumbling empire. In a desperate move, the governor offered Amara's hand to another political son from a rival family. But Amara, bitter and scorned, refused to be treated like a bargaining chip again. She leaked private voicemails, one of which revealed Uma mocking the elders and bragging that they are all puppets in Igbata. That was the final nail. A special impeachment committee was formed the very next morning. His political party suspended him, pending further investigation into unethical conduct. Within hours, several of his loyal allies defected. Overnight, he went from being the kingmaker to a man trying to keep the crown from slipping off his head. His wife, Lady Evelyn, refused to show her face in public. His mansion, once a fortress, became a cold museum of regrets. And yet, even in all this, Uma still refused to admit he had done wrong. Not to his son, not to Chidurra. He blamed love. He blamed weakness. He blamed the past. But deep inside he knew the truth. He had tried to play God, and now his own house had crumbled under the weight of his ambition. In a private call with Chief Maduka, he begged for time. "Give me a chance to make this right," he pleaded. "I can still find my son, fix this." But Maduka laughed coldly. "You had a son," he said. "Now you have a lesson." The line went dead. The governor slumped in his chair, gripping his whiskey glass with trembling fingers. Somewhere far from him, two hearts had chosen peace over power. And now, all he had was a name, one that was quickly losing its meaning. In a quiet town tucked behind the valleys of northern Sukka, far from the political noise and surveillance cameras, Oena and Chidurra began a new life. It wasn't the future they imagined as children, but it was theirs. They shared a single room with a leaking roof and one wooden window. They cooked over firewood, fetched water from a distant stream, and slept on a mat made of raffia. But there was laughter. Real laughter. The kind that heals. Oena taught local boys mathematics in the afternoons, while Chidurra joined a seamstress who agreed to teach her how to cut and sew for free. The villagers didn't ask questions. They knew pain when they saw it, and they respected silence. No one asked where they came from, only who they were now. And now they were simply two people in love, holding each other together in a world that had tried to tear them apart. But danger still lingered like smoke behind the hills. Oena remained cautious. He never visited the same market twice. He always sat near the back during community gatherings. He stopped reading newspapers, not because he didn't want to know, but because knowing brought back pain. One evening, Chidurra caught him staring into the bush, his eyes distant. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He turned slowly. "My mother. I wonder if she's okay. I miss her. I miss the sound of her voice." Chidurra took his hand and placed it on her chest. "You'll hear it again," she said. "Maybe not today. Maybe not soon. But one day, this storm will pass." And as the wind howled gently outside, they curled together under a tattered blanket, using each other as warmth against the coldness of what they left behind. On the first night of a new year, Chidurra lit a lantern and sat by the window, humming softly. Oena walked over, kissed the top of her head, and placed the old necklace around her neck again. "I don't have your father's name anymore," he said with a small smile. "But I still have you." She smiled back, eyes shimmering. "And that's more than enough." Outside, fireworks burst faintly in the distance, echoes of a world they no longer belonged to. But inside, the flicker of love remained unshaken. They were still in hiding, still hunted, still uncertain. But they were together. And sometimes, surviving with the one you love is the loudest kind of victory. To be continued. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.